Good afternoon, everybody. Bonjour à toutes et tous, and welcome to the webinar Cases and Documented Experiences of Gender Violence on Latin American Campuses, organized by the Human Rights Research and Education Center at the University of Ottawa and Scholars at Risk Ottawa chapter. We're just going to give a few more minutes and while people connect, and then we'll start with our webinar. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us. Okay, so more people will be joining within the next few minutes. So first and foremost, thank you everybody for being here with us. My name is Salvador Herencia Carrasco. I am director of the Human Rights Clinic at the Human Rights Research and Education Center at the University of Ottawa. And for us, it is a privilege to welcome today two colleagues from Women at the Center, Alison Morrison and Neca Mcgregor, who will be talking to us about very important subjects, issues relating to survivors of sexual and gender violence. But in the first part of this webinar, we will hear from Catalina Arango, who is the project coordinator for the project of Scholars at Risk in the Americas, and Paige Holland, a student from our Human Rights Clinic, who will talk about a bit the work that we have been doing and the emphasis that our monitoring and advocacy activities have done on issues related to sexual violence in Latin American campuses. Just a few words before we start is that we have been working, or the Human Rights Research and Education Center has been working on issues related to academic freedom for almost 3 years now, with the purpose of monitoring situations that affect academic freedom, the integrity of students and the communities within the university, so that there can be a safe space for the interchange of ideas and advancement of new ideas and knowledge. And none of that can be achieved if women do not feel safe to pursue their research interest, and they are under a clear, safe environment where the university's role is to protect and to prevent them from being harassed or attacked in any way, shape, or form. So part of the work that we're going to present today within the work of the Human Rights Research and Education Center has been monitoring the complex situations that affect women, whether they are professors, students, or support or staff within university campuses. So in the past years, we have been monitoring different cases and different situations, and we want to continue to work with this so that universities can actually adopt mechanisms so that this type of harassment and violence in any way, shape, or form is not part of the university policies or practices. So I invite you all to follow us on social media. Also follow Women at the Center on social media for the great work that they have been doing throughout on this matter. So without further ado, I would like to first introduce my colleague Catalina Arango, project coordinator of the project on academic freedom in the Americas. Yeah, each speaker will have approximately 12 to 15 minutes to present their ideas. So Catalina, please be my guest.
Thank you, Salvador. I am very honored to be here. And I'm very happy to share with you guys the reflections and analysis that we have done so far in this topic after monitoring and reporting cases in Latin America. So I can start saying that my mom was the first anesthesiologist of the city in which I was born, in Colombia. One day in class, one professor told her that he seriously doubted she could make it. His words were, "Girls' brains are not made for science." It was 1975. When I started university back in 1995, the leader of the student association gave a welcome speech to all of us, more than 200 insecure freshmen. By the end of the speech, trying to finish his words with a glorious joke, he said, "Finally, let me especially welcome our virgin female first-year students, who at the end of this year will be neither the one nor the other, with or without their consent." The crowd just laughed. It was, both universities were prestigious universities in Colombia. The violence women face at universities was real for both my mom and I. Today, I will open the discussion on this topic, one, by giving you a small regional context, two, by including the notion of naturalization of violence to address the problem, and third, by understanding what has been done and what is missing to transform regional universities into safer places for women. Caroline, please click. Latin America is indeed a dangerous place to be for women. We have some statistics here. The first is from 2003-2009, in which we can see a prevalence of domestic violence in many countries of the region. Click, please. COVID has aggravated the situation, as we all know. Official information of 15 countries of Latin America and 4 countries of the Caribbean show that 4,555 women have been victims of femicide in 2019. Click, please. Universities are not away from this reality. The academic community has participated for decades in the discussion of gender violence, but also has experienced painful cases within their campuses. It is necessary to understand that the greater production of violence against women that occurs in the university environment appears to be located at the micro level, but at the same time is structural and has a direct link with the way in which power is distributed. In other words, although there are cases of violence that can be extremely serious and which must be defined openly, in general, the situation of violence at universities appear to be disaggregated and invisible. We could imagine it as an atmosphere of violence latent in various spaces. I know you guys know what I'm talking about. Click, please. Femicide has happened in Latin America more times than one have been expected, unfortunately. But the most common practice talking about university daily life in Latin America is sexual harassment. Using the definition of the Organization of American States in 1994, click please, we understand sexual harassment. Oh, could you go back, please? We understand sexual harassment as the time of sexual violence and discrimination based on gender that justifies and perpetuates power relations, subordination, and inequality. One of the most interesting achievements that those who at Latin American universities fight for building a safer environment for women is that they have been able to identify and make visible the microviolence that occur in the daily life on campus. A woman does not have to be killed or bitten to experience violence. Words, gestures, we know that can be form of violence. For example, women at the university may experience, now click, Caroline, please, self-harassment on jokes, conversation with sexual tone, looks or gestures, like this example from the University of Chile, in which a professor tells one student, "Miss, what kind of neckline is that? Did you come to take a test or to be milked?" Click, please. We have also experienced moderated harassments on calls, letter, messages, like this example from the University in Argentina, where a professor just sent WhatsApp texts to a student saying, "You drive me crazy. I look at you a lot. Sometimes I play stupid to avoid being so obvious. And something intrigues me, how your kisses would be like." Well, she says, "Well, none of it will happen. I have my life and your fantasies are too much." The professor replies, "So sorry, seriously. Click, please." They can also experience strong harassment when they are robbed, held, or cornered. Click, please. Or severe harassment when they are physically or psychological forced to any sexual contact, like Lisbeth Sanabria, the girl in this image from National University in Colombia, who was able to prove in this video how her professor harassed her. Click, please. The reflection of violence against women at universities has gone further. It is a matter not only of microviolences, but also of normalization of gender and sexual violence based on culture and status quo. Click, please. According to the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin American and in the Caribbean, in 2016 publication, since the 90s, 15 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have different regulatory frameworks for sexual violence against women. Despite the legislation that has existed for more than 20 years, the progress in terms of routes for complaining, inspecting, and monitoring this type of violence have been insufficient. The Commission claimed that this prevention and recognition of what happens in universities related to gender and sexual violence has been ignored and normalized by the actors involved and by the institutions responsible for taking measures. So normalization of violence in higher education can be explained as a product of two tendencies that we have here. One is that inequality and violence are seen as systematic phenomenon, complex and structural. Universities start patronizing omission and inaction against the claims and complaints because they do not want to dismantle the structures of power they already know. And second, universities downplay the importance and significance of the evidence, seeing the event of violence as an individual or isolated act, and assume a defense attitude. These two tendencies also influence victims deeply. More than half of the victims do not report because they consider, quote, that that was something unimportant that did not affect me seriously, or this is how it is. So they naturalize and normalize the situation of violence of which they have been victims. Click, please. In order to understand what has been done and what is missing, click, please, to transform regional universities into safer places for women, I will share with you a study done by the digital media Distintas Latitudes and 35 journalists from the LATAM network of young journalists in 2019. They undertook the task of analyzing the issue of sexual harassment and violence in Latin America. And they include 100 universities from 16 countries, a universe of 51 private, 48 public, and 1 state-subsidized institutions, which together agglomerate more than 4,500,000 students. The general objective of this study was to identify how many of the selected universities have protocols for attention to sexual violence and how they were implemented. The results, in most cases, are disappointing. Only 40% of the universities investigated have protocols, to prevent, attend, and punish sexual violence. Although not all the cases are public or easy to consult. And one data that is really relevant is that between 2015 and 2018, 75% of the protocols were created. That data is an evidence of the relationship between the growth of the feminist wave and the social media pressure on the issue. And we can conclude that protocols are almost never funny concessions from university authorities, but struggles won directly by students. Click, Caroline, please. So, but the protocol is not the same as universities being 100% safer spaces. We know that students affected by sexual violence and sexual harassment maintain their distrust in the institution, just like they did before, where when there was not a protocol. Victims face setbacks, disbeliefs, attempts to persuasion so they can desist from the complaint, or for the most delicate situation, re-victimization. This leads to impunity, which is also another trend that we have monitored in the Americas. For institutional protocols to work and mitigate sexual harassment for women in universities and not remain as dead letters depend on many factors, but without a doubt, the most relevant are, click please, a deep change in the culture and the structure of power, in the way we as academic communities create symbols, discourses, and meanings. Two, a follow-up in the victims and their struggles. I mean, it's not only necessary to make the case visible, but also to follow the process of solving the issue. And then created networks that support their victims and their demand of changes and accountability. And that it's a very important role that universities and organizations as we are doing today. So this, I believe, I strongly believe that if we change the culture, the structure of power, we support the victims and we create networks, would be a way to minimize the impacts of gender violence at the university. Thank you very much. So now I open the floor to Paige Holland, one of our student researchers for the Scholars at Risk in the Americas project. And she will share with us our analysis on the role that students and student associations play in addressing sexual violence on campus. One thing that we especially want to do today is to thank the research done by Aman Gopra and Dana Ilara, also student researchers in our team who cannot be with us today. Thank you. Paige, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paige, and thank you, Catalina. You have 12 to 15 minutes also to present. Thanks.
Thank you. And I just want to also start off by saying thank you to Caroline for helping me with my PowerPoint slides for this presentation, as well as to the other two student researchers who have helped put together the research over the last few weeks that I will talk about today. So I'll just wait for the PowerPoint to start. All right, so to begin, universities cannot be abstracted from the contexts of violence that different countries of the Americas are experiencing. Among their political battles, their students and student associations have taken a position against gender violence, as in practically every country of the region, there is a strong degree and level of gender violence. This is expressed through cases of femicide, domestic violence, and of course, harassment. These acts of violence have been pivotal in showing that violence against women exists both in the private and the public sphere. Next slide. These campus-based movements echo broader campaigns against gender violence that have built strength for over a decade. For example, the following campaigns. In 2011, a police officer told a group of female students from York University in Toronto that if they did not want to be sexually assaulted, they should not dress like whores. The outrage caused by this comment led them to carry out, in April 2011, the first slut walk. Since then, the slut walk has been taking place all over North America for years as women protest the different slurs that they are called. Next slide. In 2015 and 2016, starting in Mexico and reaching different countries of Latin America, marches revolved around the following mottos: no means no, not one less, and we want to be alive. These demanded an end to sexist violence and femicides. The demonstrations had a common purpose: to manifest women's absolute satiety and accumulated rage against structural, cultural, and institutional violence. Next slide. In 2017, the hashtag #MeToo movement went viral on the internet. Millions of women from many countries shared their experiences online and on the streets. The hashtag blew up with many esteemed celebrities or politicians sharing their own stories of sexual assault and harassment. In 2019 and the beginning of 2020, women across Latin America manifested against gender violence. Brazil had no is no, Argentina had not one less, Chile had non-sexist education, Mexico had they don't take care of me, they raped me, and Colombia had it isn't normal. These student movements in various countries have also found many different ways to link themselves. In broader mobilizations at universities of Latin America, and of course at institutions of higher education around the world, we are witnessing what we could classify as a demand for social change. This change points to a profound alteration of the dominant culture that implies violence against women in everyday life. This has been considered ordinary, acceptable, and even natural. Student movements of the region have lined up with the following actions. Next slide. The first of these actions is online advocacy. Mobilization through social networks became a way of generating encounters between student associations and members of organizations that work against gender violence to amplify a narrative. This narrative reaches a wider audience to promote the message at a much higher speed than the traditional means of activism, despite the lack of resources. The greatest input for the mobilization was the testimonies that victims and witnesses of sexual harassment and gender violence have shared on social networks. The sum of those individual voices became a mean to raise awareness about the residues of violence that have been tolerated in everyday life. These testimonies had the dual purpose of making visible and denaturing violent behaviors against women. Next slide. This is a Facebook post from No es Normal from the University of Los Andes in Colombia in 2018. There's a lot of different posts about that were calling a lot of slurs and saying that they hate queer people as well as women. And there's a lot of terms of hate and discrimination that were used in class against students at the university. Naming the impacts of such violence through testimonials was important. However, the mere enunciation and recognition have proven insufficient. The testimonies were published to make the cases visible and viral. However, no one carried out a follow-up report of the person behind the testimony or the disciplinary or judicial processes after the report. Some of these testimonies have become emblematic cases that were then taken for protests in the streets. The second way that student associations make change is marches as performative acts or protests. Addressing everyday violence meant some simile of spectacularism. The denounced violence opened the door to the little wars that were fought every day in the classrooms and hallways of universities. Young women who make public their discomfort with certain verbal or bodily behaviors of men are pointing out that unacceptable behaviors are part of these social environments. In addition, they are drawing attention to, rebelling against, and in some ways deactivating the following: the erroneous social belief in the inherent inferiority of women, those discursive strategies that compare the feminine with the inert, the animal, the submissive, which serve as a vehicle to express disdain for women. The hierarchies and imbalances of forces of power that come into play in everyday interactions, which constitute the symbolic bases of male supremacy. The circulation of a series of misunderstandings where access to the body of women is interpreted as a male right. Those wrong forms of interpolation that situate women in the condition of objects. Women are instrumentalized, they are considered interchangeable beings whose bodies can be invaded, violated, and possessed. The mechanisms of expulsion, exclusion, discipline, and humiliation of women. Next slide. In many countries, activists have replicated a Chilean mass protest anthem and performance called Un violador en tu camino, which means a rapist in your path, which includes women doing blindfolds and chanting against impunity for their aggressors. And this is just a clip of the mass protest anthem. I think you might have to unmute yourself, Caroline. At the heart of this extensive mobilization is the question of the capacity of the system to recognize, punish, and repair gender violence. #MeToo and all of the following demonstrations were expressions of solidarity in which the claims and experiences of women could be validated. Using social networks to send these messages insistently points out the incapacity that the legal system or the university administration has had to process the individual claims. Next slide. In many cases and countries, impunity is a common threat to the victims of gender violence. This has also become one of the biggest complaints of student movements. In most situations, the victims of violence are discriminated against by the university authorities or by the agents of power, who then minimize the violence suffered or do not believe the word of the victim. This is how victims have been re-victimized multiple times. An emblematic case of impunity is Leslie Berlin Osorio, a 22-year-old woman who was murdered in Mexico. On May 3rd of 2017, she was found strangled by a telephone cord at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, or UNAM. The officer of the public prosecutor had sent out a variety of tweets about Osorio following the murder case that blamed Osorio for her own murder. The following tweets described this. They said that she was an alcoholic and a bad student, that she'd left home and was living with her boyfriend, as well as that she'd been taking drugs with her friends. This then started the hashtag #SiMeMaten, if I am killed, which sees women present how their personal lives would be used against them if they were murdered. This hashtag then resulted in protests all over Mexico, with women explaining the different ways that they would be blamed for being murdered. The university did not stand by Lesbian, nor did the prosecutor responsible for finding her murderer. At the end, justice did prevail, largely due to the pressure of the protests that were happening around Mexico, and her boyfriend was convicted to 45 years in jail for femicide. Osorio is an emblematic case to depict the femicide that happens across many Latin American countries. By being blamed for her own murder, the prosecutor entered the case with a bias against women. Victim blaming is also as common with rape cases and other murder cases. The #SiMeMaten hashtag brought forward many protests of women, listing all of these different reasons why they would be blamed for their murders, and protesting the fact that they are more likely to be murdered in the first place. Another case of impunity that is common in Latin America is the dismissal of sexual assault or harassment cases. For example, Karen, which is a pseudonym for a female student at the same university Osorio was murdered at, filed a case against her thesis supervisor. After this complaint was submitted, his comments increased in severity. When she demanded a new thesis supervisor, she was told by the officials at the university to withdraw the demand and was pressured to say that she was nervous, not that anything was truly wrong. Cases like this happen all around Latin America, with women enduring dismissal of their assaults and harassments constantly. Next slide. These student movements have not only made cases visible, but also in very exceptional cases fostered the first steps towards a transformation to deal better with the situation. One main case exemplifies this. In July of 2018, the Constitutional Court of Colombia ruled in favor of Professor Neca Mcgregor, who was dismissed from the University of Ibagué in 2017 for reporting on cases of sexual and gender violence at the university. The ruling found that Professor Neca Mcgregor's dismissal was illegitimate and ordered the University of Ibagué to reinstate her and to implement protocols against sexual and gender violence. Additionally, the rule called on the Ministry of Education to establish guidelines for higher education institutions in relation to the duties and obligations in cases of workplace harassment or sexual gender violence that occur within them, highlighting the fact that the state has an obligation in international law to protect, respect, and guarantee the right of women to be freed from violence. The ruling came at a critical time, as gender and sexual violence is a common reality in higher education institutions in Colombia, and for far too long the issue was given insufficient attention by university authorities as well as the state, despite calls for action and protests from the academic community. In fact, the Attorney General's office revealed that there were 10,830 complaints of gender and sexual violence involving students between 2008 and 2017. This demonstrates a pattern of indifference and even tolerance on the part of the higher education institutions. In response to the Constitutional Court of Colombia's ruling, the Ministry of Education published a long-awaited document in August 2018, which was entitled Gender Approach and Identities for the Guidelines in Inclusive Higher Education Policy. This outlines guidelines for building an inclusive higher education sphere using an intersectional approach that takes into account the experiences of women, LGBTQ2+ people, as well as rural people. The research behind the document was carried out by the National University School of Gender Studies, student groups, independent researchers, and organizations dedicated to guaranteeing equal and educational rights. Thus, the academic community played an important role in the development and production of the document. Next slide. In November of 2018, students from universities across Colombia met with the Ministry of Education at a hearing in the Congress of the Republic of Colombia to provide their testimonies on and experiences with gender and sexual violence. This was in order to help design a public policy that prevents, punishes, and eradicates all forms of gender and sexual violence in higher education institutions. According to one student, Cindy Caro, a member of the National University School of Gender Studies, who participated in the development and production of the document on gender violence, the guidelines from the Ministry of Education are, quote, important because they guide universities, but they have a big problem. They are not binding or mandatory. The students proposed a law that obliges the Ministry of Education to demand from higher education institutions, public and private, a comprehensive policy that addresses gender and sexual violence in higher education institutions. The step that Colombia has taken, in part pushed by the Colombian student movement, is a significant stride towards combating gender and sexual violence at universities. However, the journey is far from over. Students and student unions across the region continue to make visible cases of harassment and violence, to protest neglectful and abusive behavior by university authorities, and to organize meetings with policymakers to provide recommendations on how to make universities safer spaces for women and other marginalized groups. That is everything for my research for today for the webinar, and I thank everyone again for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much, Paige, for your presentation, and also Catalina. Before we turn to Neca Mcgregor, I would like to just remind everybody that if you have any questions, any comment in preparation for our discussion, you're free to please post your questions in the chat. Feel free to pose your questions either in English or in French. So we welcome everybody's comment and insight on this matter. So, and now it is my pleasure to introduce Neca Mcgregor, who is the executive director and co-founder of the Women at the Center organization, and she will speak to us about survivors, the experience of survivors of sexual and gender violence, and the challenges that they continue to face and when addressing or looking for justice as a whole. One important point that Paige mentioned at the start of her presentation is that discrimination and sexual violence does not know of geographical boundaries. It affects us north and south, and so it is very important for us to understand not only the experiences and the challenges in Latin America, but how do they replicate in some way, shape, in some ways also in North American and other institutions in the global north. Neca, it is a great pleasure to have you with us, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Salvatore and Catalina and Paige, for inviting my lovely colleague Alison and I to participate today. I want to start off actually by acknowledging that I'm coming to you on this sunny Tuesday afternoon from my home in Toronto, which is the Indigenous homes of the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, the Métis, the Huron-Wendat. And I always start by acknowledging the land, because without the stewardship of our Indigenous hosts, none of us will be here and today enjoying this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. And I also feel that it's important to acknowledge that this is Indigenous land on which we're speaking, or on which we're doing our work. And for me, I talk about it as the rent that I pay Indigenous communities. The rent I pay to them is not financial, but it's in my abilities to be an ally, actually an accomplice. I'm quoting my wonderful colleague Jade Peak for that. We are accomplices to the rights and the fights against the genocide that's being perpetrated against Indigenous communities. So I just want to express my gratitude. And secondly, I also want to introduce my wonderful, brilliant colleague, Alison Morrison, who, do you want to say a few, wave or say something, Alison?
Sure. My name is Alison Morrison. I'm a project coordinator with Women at the Center, and Neca and I are both really excited to be here with all of you today to talk about our Transformative Accountability and Justice Initiative.
Yes, indeed. So I'm going to share my screen, and actually, hold on, can you all see it?
It's just loading, I think.
Yeah, not yet.
Is it on? Okay, brilliant. So I thought that the presentations that Catalina and Paige had given really resonated a lot with the work that we have been doing as an organization. I want to first center the work of the organization. We are a very unique nonprofit, unique in the sense that we are the only incorporated nonprofit organization that was developed by and for women and trans survivors of all forms of gender-based violence, including sexual violence. What makes us unique, as I said, is because we are survivors, our members, of whom there's over 4,000 globally, most of whom are in Canada. And the work that we do really is, how can we, as those individuals who have experienced the violence, how can we use the trauma and the tragedies to actually transform our communities? How do we use the lessons that we learned as a result of experiencing violence to bring about change? I don't know what happened. It went back to, can you all see it? Oh, there we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
good. So part of the work is that we have a really robust research arm of the organization, which one of our board co-chairs, actually, her name is Dr. Tokwe Adefarakan. The research and education portfolio is one that she manages. And in that work, we've done a lot of work in that portfolio. We've done a lot of work in the past, not just on sort of the way the systems impact survivors, but also specifically on research areas that survivors have come forward to say that this is something that we need to look into, but look into it from the lens of survivors. So we do participatory research, and it's based on what survivors are telling us. One of the points I also want to make is that the Catalina, you were talking about policies and protocols universities and legislations, one of the things that we found was that actually legislation, policies and programs and protocols don't actually stop the violence from happening. It's men who stop violence from happening, because men are the ones who perpetrate overwhelmingly these gender-based sexual violence that we're going to be talking about. So I always caution around when people talk about we need to have policies in place, we need to have legislation. Canada has some of the best legislations on the books around sexual violence, around violence in general, violence against women, and yet violence against women still persists. Today, Alison and I are going to take you through a really comprehensive and brilliant, if I say so myself, research that Women at the Centre conducted from 2016 and presented last year, 2020. And it's called the Declarations of Truth, Documenting Insights from Survivors of Sexual Violence, that actually led us to create a new framework. We adapted a framework that's based on transformative justice, and we call it the Transformative Accountability and Justice Model, which we'll present at the end. But hold on, I'm going to start. I want to start actually by contextualizing the work that we do and why. I'm going to put all of this on the slide. Why we felt that an alternative model of justice was important. So I'm taking the work from Holly Johnson, brilliant academic, Holly Johnson's Sexual Assault Attrition Pyramid, that actually showed, based on stats from Stats Canada, based on data from Statistics Canada, of 460,000 reported instances of sexual violence, only 0.3% of the perpetrators of the sexual violence were actually ever convicted. And 97% of all of those who had been reported, 97.7% were not. And so we started asking ourselves, what is actually happening in the criminal legal system? How is it actually either creating a difference, either holding perpetrators and those who harm accountable? How is it supporting survivors and providing justice and healing for survivors if the statistics are so abysmal? If all the money that is being spent on the criminal legal system is only leading to a conviction of 0.3%, something is wrong. If the overwhelming majority of perpetrators are getting away with the sexual assaults that they're committing. I really don't know what that strumming is. Is it coming from me?
I think it is coming from you, yes, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Either.
Yeah.
Oh my days.
But it's all good. It's all good. Yes.
Okay, so
we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So we're going to present you with what Women at the Centre actually did in that research initiative, and Alison is going to take you through the data. You know what? Hold on one second. Give me a second. I am going to.
So I can sort of introduce our data collection methods while Neca figures out where the mysterious noise is coming from. So in order to capture the sort of depth of what we know is the amount of sexual assaults that happen and that are reported and that don't ever sort of come to any sort of conviction or accountability in the traditional criminal justice system, we knew that we had to approach this data collection from what we like to call the kaleidoscope perspective, which included, as you can see on this slide, monitoring sexual assault trials through our Court Watch program, where either staff, students, or volunteers attended court proceedings in Toronto to sort of monitor the rhetoric that was happening, the protocols that the survivors were being subjected to, et cetera, and just making sure that just kind of getting a sense of what was happening inside those rooms. And then in addition to that, we audited the judges' decisions in the cases that we monitored, but also additional cases to understand how they were coming to their decisions, what factors they were considering, and so kind of all of that from the judge's perspective. And then we also, obviously, as survivors, wanted to involve survivors with lived experience because they are the experts on what happens in these types of experiences. So we conducted
13 one-on-one interviews with women, both located in Toronto and in Renfrew County. And these were with women who did report their assault to police, because obviously there are different dynamics that go into that. So we wanted to make sure we had both women who did report and women who didn't report. And to capture the experiences of women who did not report, we conducted about 16 focus groups with 16 women, 5 in Renfrew County and 5 in Toronto, 11 in Renfrew County. And these are all women who did not report their assaults to the traditional criminal legal system. And then in addition to that, we wanted to make sure that we fully understood the broader social factors that go into how people understand and contextualize their own violence. And so we audited or sort of looked at and did a media scan of about over 3,000 tweets, Instagrams, Facebook posts, print and TV news, films, shows, and podcasts, which really just gives us sort of a very comprehensive overview of this reported, non-reported sexual assaults from a variety of different angles. So next, I think we're going to talk about what else we did in terms of secondary research, and I will turn it back to you, Neca.
Thank you very much. So for secondary research, we looked at what other models of justice were around. And there were some jurisdictions, for example, in South Africa, that had specialized sexual violence courts, which we immediately looked at and dismissed, because we know that in Canada, especially in Ontario, there are already specialized courts that deal, for example, with domestic violence. And because of the court watch that the organization has done for a number of years, where we go into these specialized domestic violence courts, we realized that there was nothing specialized about them. Judges who were supposed to know about the power and control dynamics were making problematic comments towards the victims of the crime and minimizing the actions of the perpetrators. We also knew how defense counsels and even the crowns were oftentimes unable to really hold perpetrators accountable. So we knew that specialized sexual violence courts would not be the way to go. And instead, we started looking at alternative models, including restorative justice, which the restorative justice model, which comes actually out of indigenous South Africa after the apartheid, their truth and reconciliation movement. Restorative justice was something that, again, we didn't, as an organization, feel that would really serve the needs that we were looking for, especially because none of the members of our team identified it as indigenous. And so jumping onto that restorative justice bandwagon, which I think is actually a beautiful process, but we just were not equipped and competent to model that model. Instead, we came across the transformative justice model, which was developed by Black women and Black trans women, as well as disability activists in the United States. And I also always talk about Beth Ritchie and Mimi Kim, who are the foremothers of the transformative justice model. And the idea behind that is that communities hold the perpetrator, the person that does harm, responsible. The community gathers round and holds that individual accountable, and does it in a way that is not throwing that person away, does it in a way that understands that these individuals have themselves often experienced trauma. And the whole notion of hurting people was really central to figuring out alternative ways to bring people back into society without harming them, but transforming and changing their attitudes and their behaviors. Because what we do know is that the criminal legal system is not a place for reformation or transformation. It's a place for retribution and blame. And also problematic in that criminal legal system is that it is disproportionate in the identities. Who are the individuals who are prosecuted? Who are the individuals who are convicted? Who are the individuals who are incarcerated? Are overwhelmingly Black men and indigenous men. And by the same token, who is believed, who when they do report gets to be believed and who is not believed? Overwhelmingly white women are the ones who are believed and Black women are not. And so we recognize that the criminal legal system was not a place that for all women to feel safe that they can go and report. And so the transformative justice model became a really fascinating alternative for us to explore. So we took 3.5 years of, as Alison said, that kaleidoscope of data, and then created the model. And we have a little video that really speaks to what we did and why we did it. Oh, I just missed that. Hold on. I'm hoping it plays. Oh, it's not playing. We're not having any luck with videos, because that brilliant one, the Chilean anthem, we couldn't hear the chants properly. You know what, we're going to carry on. I'm going to take you through very quickly what this model that we created, what it actually looks like. And I'm going to, Alison, are you going to do this, or was I?
I can do it if you'd like.
You can do it, go for it.
So the video obviously was just a little bit of an overview that sort of went into the information that we synthesized to create and adapt this model for our purposes. And so in conceptualizing the model, it has turned into about a six-phase process. The first of which is, as it says on the screen, the outreach process, where by either conducting outreach directly with survivors, with organizations that work with survivors, with organizations that work with aggressors, or otherwise working with other contacts that we have within the criminal legal system to identify survivors and aggressors who might be interested in participating in this model. However, I will mention that a big part of the way that we designed this was to operate outside of the traditional criminal legal system. So it is not designed to act as a deferral program or anything in concert with the traditional criminal legal process. And so that is sort of phase one of outreach. Neca, I'm not sure, but I think we maybe have lost the slides.
Can you see it now?
No.
No, I think you stopped sharing the screen.
Hold on 1 second. I am so sorry. I don't know what is going on with technology today.
No worries. No worries.
Everything
we're happy,
is okay.
and we're happy to have you here with us.
Thank you.
I can continue sort of giving a verbal overview until we get back.
Actually, so, Alison, can you share your screen instead?
I think I can. Let's just try.
Yes.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so as I was just mentioning, that was kind of an overview of phase one. And then as we move into phase two, we're getting kind of, we either get survivor and aggressor participants through sort of two ways. One of which would be conducting direct outreach with organizational partners that we have that do this work, or receiving referrals from other community partners who might know of cases that are pending, or we have had conversations with Crown attorneys, et cetera, who are working with survivors and aggressors in this capacity, because we do know that there are sort of differing levels and motivations as to why certain individuals might get involved with processes like these. So once we have received the referrals or conducted the outreach, we are going to be doing screening processes to just ensure that we're engaging with as many people as we can without also compromising the safety of any of the participants, our staff, the aggressors, et cetera. So our screening tools right now, we're sort of in a pilot process. So we're looking at, we are in the process of identifying which ones we'd like to use and developing our own tools as well to ensure that we've really addressed all the immediate needs assessments that we need to be doing with both survivor and aggressor participants. So phase four is orientation, which the next two slides will go over in much more detail for what that looks like for each participant, because it is a slightly different process for the survivor than it is for the aggressor. And then engagement, so that's conducting the process with both participants. In the pilot version, we foresee this as about a 12-week process, but obviously understanding that in order to actually transform behavior, each case is approached on an individual level, and there are different factors to be considered in each situation that might sort of lengthen or shorten the process depending on what else is going on. And then finally, the last phase is feed forward, which is just essentially that throughout the process, especially as we're in the pilot phase, we're going to be gathering like extensive data on the experiences of the participants, the experiences of the support teams and staff members, volunteers, et cetera, so that we know and have constantly evolving protocols on what works, what doesn't work, and how to do this better for all the participants that are interested. So I believe the next slide is, yes. So as a survivor is brought on, the first thing that happens is that they are assigned their survivor support team members, which as part of the orientation process, they introduce themselves, explain the overview of what the process looks like, manage any expectations about what's expected from both the survivor and the aggressor in terms of communication between the two parties. It's all very focused on what the survivor needs and wants. So however they engage with the aggressor, if they want that, is done through the two support teams. And then the survivor support team will also be like reviewing and supporting with meeting basic and immediate needs, because we know that the survivors will come to us at different stages of their healing journeys and might have different needs in terms of like immediate childcare and other things of that nature. Then the survivor will be taken through the Transformative Accountability Justice Program for Survivors, which is a comprehensive, engaging workshop series modeled off of our C6 program, which is a intensive sort of wraparound counseling program for survivors of gender-based violence, basically designed to unpack the social conditions that enable male-perpetrated violence against women, as well as contextualizing their own experience by discussing topics like how the patriarchy upholds violence, internalized racism, structures of oppression, and all of those types of societal issues that contribute to this perpetuated culture of violence. And then this is also facilitated by the survivor support team, so they become sort of the group that wraps the survivor with support, kindness, and compassion throughout their whole process with this model. In this process, the survivor support team is also helping the survivor to develop her justice and accountability statement, which basically takes the form of sort of a checklist of things that if, in order for the survivor to feel that justice and accountability has been met in this process for her, things that the aggressor would need to meet or do to meet that definition for her. And so the survivor support team supports with that, navigating any terms or conditions and developing strategies to bring to the accountability and support team. As the slide says, the survivor support team are the people who would be liaising with the accountability and support team, so that there is no contact between the survivor and the aggressor directly, unless the teams facilitate that and it's something that the survivors want. In addition to the justice and accountability statement, the survivor support team works to help the survivor develop their personal transformation statement, because while we know that the goal of this is to transform harmful attitudes mostly on the path of the aggressor, but we also know that there's a personal transformation journey that's happening in order to heal the trauma and address any other harms that the survivor may have experienced. And so this model is really kind of just to be a whole comprehensive wraparound model to allow people to heal at their own pace and how they're doing. So I think that's, yep. And then Neca, I'm not sure if you can see the slides, but I can continue if you'd like me to.
Please continue, because my internet is unstable and you're rocking it. Thanks.
So the next piece of this is that the aggressor, engaging with the aggressor and how we do that. So again, as I briefly went over with the survivor piece of this, once the aggressor is identified, they are also assigned accountability and support team members. And so the process is very similar and almost parallel to the process that the survivor is engaging with. However, the sort of goals and metrics and the content of the programming is a bit different depending on any specific identities that the survivor or aggressor may have, as well as like societal factors that they might be facing different than others who engage with the program. So once the basic needs and assessment has been done and expectations have gone over, the aggressors are taken through the Transformative Accountability Justice Program for aggressors, which is again quite similar to the one for survivors that we've created, designed for the aggressors to unlearn the social conditions of gender-based sexual violence, focusing on topic areas like consent, what it is, what it's not, understanding toxic masculinity, understanding the patriarchy, addressing why hurt people, as well as resources for aggressors to continue on their healing journeys and help them build empathy for others. The accountability and support team also helps the aggressor review the justice and accountability statement from the survivor to make sure that as we're going through this process and the aggressor is unlearning all these things and the survivor is being supported in all of these ways, we're also ensuring that this aggressor is actually on track to sort of meet the things that are set out in the justice and accountability statement and navigating any thing that comes up in that, as well as liaising with the survivor support team, as I mentioned earlier, in case any contact is desired at all by the survivor. The aggressor can't make that choice. And then similar to the personal transformation statement that the survivor will be developing, the aggressor is also supported in developing a personal accountability and transformation statement to show over time how he can show accountability and heal the harm that he caused, as well as harms that were caused to him, as we said earlier, the hurt people concept. And in addition, this statement will help aggressors develop practical strategies to ensure that they're adhering to the commitments in the statement as outlined. And then the goal, one of many, is to include steps to maintain healthy relationships with women. And so I believe that is our last slide, but that was just sort of a short and sweet overview of a very long report. And so that sort of is all that we have to say.
I just have one more thing, and thank you so much, Alison, because I was experiencing serious technological issues. But just to go back to the university campus model, we actually launched our very first on-campus chapter of Women at the Center that is at York University, where survivors who are students have started a chapter, and we're in the midst of creating another chapter at University of Toronto, and we will hopefully be creating a chapter over here in the near future. But thank you so much for allowing us space.
No, thank you very much, Neca. Thank you very much, Alison. It's a very interesting approach to and the work that you're doing. I have many questions, but I'm here to facilitate conversations. So I would like to open the floor for some questions, some comments. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand or you can start speaking. So it looks like it's way too sunny outside and people are focusing about their lunch break and getting a bit of vitamin D. So let me start first of all with Neca and Alison. Because as you were presenting the project, your pilot program, what are the changes, if any, that you're thinking of how to apply this within university spaces? No, are there any adaptations that you consider that were necessary? As looking at as a feasibility, right, to eventually uploading or taking this model to other campuses and different environments. And the second question is that if I got this information right from the first slide, only 0.3% of assailants are convicted by the criminal system. Those are Latin American numbers. And is there a reason? Also, have you understood why? Because as Neca mentioned early, Canada has on the books pretty good, strong legislation, right? What are in addition to discriminatory practices, right? Racism, patriarchy. What are the other? Do you see any other elements that contribute to this impunity, would be the correct term?
I think that the surprise that you have is universal, right? And the reason why we're not surprised is because misogyny and the patriarchy is real everywhere. And I think what Canada does is that it operates under this very thinly veiled illusion of respectability, and we have all our stuff, we've got it all together. Whereas the reality is that for survivors, regardless of where you are in this globe, on this world, women are being subjected to the same types of domestic terrorism, regardless of the skin that we're in, regardless of the geography where we live, because the patriarchy is real, right? Capitalism is real. Racism is real, regardless of where you are. And so it makes logical sense that if all of those things are everywhere, then the outcome and the attitudes are everywhere, the same everywhere. The outcomes are going to be the same everywhere. The way judges view women, and I talked about the specialized domestic violence courts, where judges will be sitting, chatting to a man who has been arrested and charged with raping, strangling, beating his long-term partner, and the judge is, you know, concerned about how this man's career is going to be impacted, whilst the survivor is sitting there. It's rife. It's rife everywhere. And so we use Holly Johnson's, that pyramid, as a way to let people see the actualities of the numbers, right? Because people are not listening to the lives of the words of survivors. So we use that so that there are some people for whom economics is the way to do it. For some people, it's, you know, statistics is the way to do it. For others, it's the words of survivors. So we just wanted to bring everything together and show people that these numbers are horrific in North America, in Canada, and as you said, it's the same as in Latin America.
Thank you. And about the feasibility of using this model within university campuses?
Alison, do you want to take that, or shall I?
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit. I think that we see there's a lot of potential to use this type of model in a university setting or post-secondary setting, especially because kind of, I think Paige may have briefly touched on this, that there are, when discussing sort of what Latin American policies on university campuses are for sexual assault, there are often, and we have been in contact with like the sexual assault centers on university campuses, and because we know that like that occurs at such high rates. And so I think that I don't necessarily see that there are very many modifications that we would have to make to the programming to translate it into a post-secondary institution, just because the nature and the dynamics of the violence are fairly similar on or off a campus. And yeah, so I don't know if Neca, if you had a different idea, but I don't really see it as needing too much. I think it fits quite seamlessly, rather unfortunately, just because of the dynamics that are so similar between the violence that occurs to women on university campuses.
And the fact that for an overwhelming majority of survivors, the perpetrator of the violence is somebody who is known to them, right? It's not the stranger that's from the bush. So in the university campus, whether it's a TA or a prof or a fellow student, it's the same as outside. It's somebody that's known, it's a roommate, it's a work colleague, it's your brother's friend. So that association and proximity really facilitates this type of model. But one thing that we didn't say is that the model isn't for all types of aggressors, because we're very, very, very cognizant that there are some perpetrators who are so violent that they need a special type of intervention. And this intervention that we've created does not really fit for serial, horrific, sadistic sexual predators. It doesn't work for them. So that's part of the process of screening out certain perpetrators.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neca. Thank you, Alison. Catalina, you had a comment, a question?
Yeah, I wanted to say that building on what Neca and Alison has been saying is that one of the claims that the student movement association and all the professors who have been victims of sexual violence at universities have is like, okay, we need support. We cannot be let alone in like denouncing this kind of behavior. But the thing is, the lack of accountability is so big that the university and the institution itself is just trying to close its doors, just to leave the victim alone, because there are structures of power that are so strong and so deep that cannot be dismantled. So that's why I believe that when these microviolences can be transformed or can be dismantled or distracted, we can start building a safer environment in the academic institutions, because it's not only that women are beaten or killed, it's also the jokes, the words, the constant insecurity that those people live and experience in the academic environment.
Yeah. Thank you, Catalina. Paige, you as a fellow student, would you like to expand on that? Give us a few insight.
I definitely think that I've not been to Latin America, so I can't as much speak on those experiences, but I think that on Canadian campuses and on the University of Ottawa campus, that those kind of sexual violent jokes are a lot more common than I think that a lot of people would like them to be in 2021. When I showed up for freshman week, when I moved into residence, there was sort of one little conversation about consent. I think they played a teacup video about forcing tea or not forcing tea, and that was about it. And they told you the statistic that you were most likely to be raped if you were a first year, a female, in the first 6 weeks that you were on campus. That was when it was most likely to happen, which was just sort of, I think personally, just putting the fear in students. I think female students sat down there and heard that statistic and went, wow, okay, that's scary. And I think it didn't address as much to the aggressors and the perpetrators. It didn't discuss the things that they could do to not be aggressive and not perpetrate these kind of acts. It just sort of told women, well, be scared, best of luck. I think there's another statistic that said that by the time that graduating class on that front lawn had graduated, that 1 in 3 of the students would have been sexually assaulted during their 4 years in the undergrad. So I think that definitely the tactic that is used by universities in Canada is to freak out the girls and to freak out the women and say, you know, if you've got a group of 3 friends, one of you will have been sexually assaulted, and freak them out and tell them that it's about what they wear and how they act and where they go and who they hang out with, versus the fact that it's aggressors and it's perpetrators who are doing these acts of violence, not whether or not you wore a miniskirt to the bar last Friday. So I do think from the student perspective that there's not as much done as there could be at all. I think that a lot of it is just, you know, you show up, they give you one speech, they say best of luck, hope it's not you. It's, you know, kind of like a gamble. There's not a lot of information. There's not anything really being said to the people that would be the aggressors or perpetrators.
Well, Paige, thank you very much for sharing that with us. And I'm sorry that this is your intro to university, right? And it shouldn't be like this. But also, since I think people are preparing hopefully more questions, I wanted to ask if you have seen, to Alison and Neca and also Catalina and Paige, how the pandemic and social isolation, or in this case curfews in other countries, have increased the numbers on cases of sexual violence and sexual harassment within homes. I think within a different project of the clinic, we are working with a special rapporteur who's looking at the impact of the pandemic on the administration of justice. And one of the issues that we see constantly is the significant increase on denounces of cases of sexual harassment and sexual violence at home. I don't know what have been your experience within this almost a year since the OMS declared a world pandemic, your feedback on this, if you don't mind.
I mean, I can speak from Women at the Center's perspective. I know Nicole, who does a lot of our membership calls, is, I believe, on this webinar, so she would want me to say that our membership engagements have increased by about 9,000% since last March. So it certainly is not only like, I've seen some articles that compare it to sort of like a dual pandemic or a parallel pandemic of violence against women, as well as the social isolation and all of the increased societal pressures that come from financial insecurity or food insecurity as a result of the pandemic, and any other societal issues that are just making it so much more prevalent for violence to occur against women at this time. And I also think that another angle that's harmful in this particular time, we were talking about this morning, I think that court proceedings have been so slowed down since the pandemic, and the courts have been shut down to protect the people who work there. But that means that things like restraining orders or other court proceedings that are meant to be protecting women in these situations aren't being allowed to move forward at all, or so slowly that it's leaving women in these tremendously precarious and dangerous positions for much longer than they would be previously.
And just to follow up from Alison's point, I saw, Salvador, you smacked your head with the stats. We traditionally have not been an organization that does frontline services, right? We are activism and we work on a sort of systemic level, but then we do engage in peer supports and peer mentoring. But since the pandemic, the outreach that women survivors are looking for spaces and places that they can go and speak to people who have a good understanding of what they're going through. And so we've been conducting a lot of safety planning. Women are calling us for safety planning. Women are experiencing the whole online world, and how, because everything is now being done virtually, there is an increase in the types of online harassment that women are also facing, and how technology facilitated sexual assaults has also increased, and how governments, Canada is actually, again, trying to get at the forefront of this, but good luck, how governments are trying to figure out ways to stymie, and it goes back to Paige's point, that the focus has always been on what women are doing and should be doing or should not be doing in order to prevent them from being raped. And what we as an organization are doing is that we are disrupting that way of thinking and saying it really is not up to me to not be raped, it is up to him not to rape, and to keep shining the lens on survivors or on women generally and gender diverse peoples, to keep putting the lens on the people who are the recipients of the violence, is a really, it's a stupid strategy that will continue to fail, and really explains why the status quo is a status quo. Because the people who are in power are invariably the men, and it's about them maintaining their power over others. And so trying to ask men in power who are misogynists to give up power and not do this stuff is not the strategy that will work. It won't. It requires, like similar to what we're all saying here, requires women taking what is rightfully ours. It requires women demanding what is rightfully ours. And it requires, Catalina, you said it, it's part of our work, accountability, right? It requires real accountability on the part of those who perpetrate the violence. But just to go back, we're not here to shame or to silence men, right? We're here to animate them, to help them help everybody. Because the power to stop rape, as I said before, doesn't lie in women, and Paige's point, and long skirts. It lies with men understanding that they have no rights over women's bodies.
Thank you very much, Neca, and sorry for my face, my expression. I am Peruvian. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and
I love it.
hearing this blank attitudes from people, I cannot just keep a straight face. So my apologies for that.
Don't apologize. We actually like it.
Thank you. Anyway, Catalina, I think you had a comment.
Yes. I have a comment, and like a I wanted to add to Neca's comment, because I was monitoring the state of affairs of the protest around Latin America yesterday, and I saw many demonstrations across the countries with the Moto 8 movement, the 8M. And many women took the streets around the region trying to claim that sexual violence and gender violence is real. And one of the things that interested me the most was that many of the demonstrators included online harassment. They said, the fact that I'm not there with you doesn't mean that you are not harassing me. So on the screen, you can also suffer violence. So I think a good way to answer your question, Salvador, is not the violence is still there. It has changed forms, because according to many in Latin America, the violence is present in WhatsApp, social networks, and also in the virtual meetings that they have with their peers and professors. So, yeah.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Catalina. And Paige, do you have a comment on that based on the research that you've been doing with us?
Yeah, I think the research definitely does show that, the online violence can be worse. And I think that online media is a very amazing tool, because it allows students particularly to come together for these protests and these demonstrations to enact real social change about topics that they're passionate about. However, I think at the same time, it can be used as a much more aggressive and sinister tool, and it is used to sort of isolate women. And I think that the pandemic has isolated a lot of women that are stuck at home and stuck in these domestic abuse situations or sexual abuse situations where they used to be able to go to work for 9 hours a day and be out of the house, and now they are at the house all the time. And I think that the pandemic, unfortunately, has really made these things kind of worse. And I think that's really unfortunate. And I think that one of the other hard parts is that women that are seeking supports, or people that are seeking supports about these sexual abuse situations, it's harder to access them if you're in the house. You're less likely to go on a Zoom call and talk about the sexual abuse that's happening in your own home if your perpetrator is in your home while you're on that Zoom call. So it's really, I think the pandemic has been really impossible for a lot of people in these situations, and it's impossible to reach out, it's impossible to get help and get out of that situation, especially during those lockdown orders and the curfew orders, is that women weren't able to escape those situations, they were just stuck in them. So I think that that's definitely been worse. I have not seen a ton of it yet in my research, as I have only recently joined the team in regards to Latin American situations for that, but I imagine it's very similar. I mean, the entire world's locked at home in their houses, and I know that sexual abuse happens in every country, everywhere. So I do think that it's been really hard for a lot of the people that are stuck in these kind of abusive households.
Thank you very much, Paige, and everybody. I mean, I have million of questions. We don't have to cancel your 4 p.m. appointment, Neca, and your focus group. But I just wanted, if I may, as a sort of wrap up, I have 2 questions. One for our colleagues of Women at the Center, one for our home team. One, the approach. I would like to know what have been the challenges in adopting a transformative justice approach in your pilot program, right? Because it is not necessarily something that can be accepted, because there's a lot of sentiments, a lot of clashes within different groups and different stakeholders in the broadest term. So if possible, right, what have been the major challenges of you trying to adopt a system that is not necessarily the criminal the criminal model because of the backlashes and the level of impunity that we have even in Canada, right? And for Catalina and Paige, I mean, in the work that you are doing within the Human Rights Research Education Center, what are the main areas of focus of challenges in identifying, and what to do with that information of more cases of sexual violence, especially in Latin America, as they're starting to go back. Most post-secondary education, just like Canada, just like Canadian universities, are trying to adopt a semi-presential model. So what are the challenges that you see that we should be on the lookout for the next time? Thank you.
I can speak a bit to your first question about the challenges that we faced, and I think one of the most significant ones is that the dynamic right now around, well, I think it's sort of been perpetuated forever, that the only path for accountability is through the criminal justice system, and the only justice that we can achieve is by casting aggressors out and putting them in a prison that will not rehabilitate them, but will get them out of our direct vision, and then we can sort of start supporting the survivor, et cetera. And so I think when the police system and prosecutors and people who we could be conducting outreach with to find aggressors, if we don't address that is not a feasible path to accountability for most people, I would argue all, but I suppose that some could argue not all, then there is going to be pushback from people who think that by allowing aggressors to engage in this type of model, we're allowing them to sort of skirt on their accountability. But then there's also pushback of from the sort of an alternate perspective of, if we allow aggressors to, it's dangerous to allow aggressors to work in this type of model, which and so it just would be easier to put them in prison and not see them ever again. So that, I think, is maybe one of the challenges that I've seen, at least in the time that I've been doing this project.
That's so well said. I completely agree with Alison. The focus, the biggest obstacle that we anticipated as we were developing this was, what's the likelihood that defense counsel will say to their clients, go to this stream, go use this. This is a really good way for you, knowing that stats that we gave at the beginning, how many men are likely to be absolved. And so for us, the challenge has been on education, on trying to get people, both in the criminal legal system and beyond, to understand that this model is actually a way of changing our society. It's actually a really beautiful way to bring accountability in a very kind and compassionate way. That education is big. Secondly is around a type of resistance that men have, right? So they commit the act and then they don't want to be blamed for it, right? So they'll come up with all manner of excuses, not realizing that this model, again, is about them healing. It's about them transforming. And then another challenge, which is also a reality, is that not all survivors want this path. For some survivors, the criminal legal system is what they want and nothing. I want him incarcerated for the rest of his life for what he's done to me. And so for us, it's also, again, back to education, to say that we are not here to totally dismantle the criminal legal system, even though I'm an abolitionist and I'm anti-carceral, but I recognize that there are some survivors for whom that's what they want, is prison and that should be there. The education piece to let people know that there are many ways, there are many paths to justice, and this model that we've created makes a lot of sense, and it's based on the wishes of survivors. This is what we were told by the women that we spoke to in our focus groups and our one-on-one and the research that we did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neca, and thank you very much, Alison, Catalina, and Paige.
Yes, and the question is, definitely we have faced two main challenges. The first one is that universities and the ministries of education or authorities of education think that the only manner to minimize gender violence is what Neca said, make protocols, create protocols, and then you will have the path to follow. But and also in parallel, the different movements of students and professors who have taken the streets say that, okay, the only way to minimize gender violence is making cases visible. So we create a Facebook page and we publish all the testimonies, and then we make noise. But they are both laying aside the support and the process of accountability that the women at the center is sharing with us, which is completely crucial in this process. The second challenge that comes to my mind is that gender violence puts academic freedom at risk, definitely. And many cases at universities are creating this atmosphere of fear that cannot let women to succeed, and democracy and dialogue to be present at the universities. So those are very important accomplishments. Challenges. I don't know, Paige, do you think? What do you think?
No, I definitely agree with that as well. What I would just say is, from what I've learned researching Latin American academic institutions, is that there's absolutely no support for victims and survivors. And it's really hard to see, because I think there are better support systems and better infrastructure in place in Canadian higher institutions. I think there's a long way to go as well for Canadian academic institutions in that regard. But I do think that it's really hard to see the absolute lack of support that exists in a lot of these Latin American institutions, and the fact that there's a lot of victim blaming and survivor blaming, and a lot of take back that complaint, don't say anything, deal with it, or drop out. There's a lot of cases I've read of women who came forward against thesis supervisors or professors and were just expelled. It wasn't a case of, reprimanding them or saying, don't do this or don't do that. They were just flat out expelled and kicked out of their university and told not to come back. So I think that it's pretty shocking to see the lack of support, and the fact that the academic institutions are just flat out preventing women from completing their degrees if they speak up about anything. So their solution is to get a degree but be silent about anything, or be vocal and just not have a degree. So I think it's been really shocking for me to see that, through my research.
Thank you very much, Paige, for your comment. And with this, we're concluding this very interesting and very insightful webinar. Just before we go, I'd just like to give two quick announcements. First, that the purpose of this webinar was, we tend to think of academic freedom as an issue more related to freedom of speech. What a professor says, or how he or she, organizes their courses. But academic freedom is a broader right that includes, not only free speech, but access to education, sexual violence, racial and ethnic discrimination, right? And many other elements that make the possibility to make the university for the university to fulfill its purpose. So when we started this project, we identified serious cases of gender violence, sexual harassment, and impunity on university campuses. Our team has published 2 annual reports from 2018 and 2019 that will be available shortly on our website. We're glad to share this research. Secondly, that the Human Rights Research and Education Center is about to start a collaboration project with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, where we are looking forward to work with this regional human rights body mechanism that covers all of the Americas in adoption of the standards, protocols, and good practices to prevent, or to not only foster academic freedom, but also to prevent sexual violence and harassment within universities. So I would like to, this is a project that we're just starting, and we really look forward to share more news with you and to actually build alliances with everybody here that is attending this project. I could not say goodbye to everybody without mentioning Professor Packer, who is here with us today, my colleague Nelson Ovalle, my good friend Lavinia Francesconi, who is in Europe, and so she's still awake, looking at us because she has a keen interest on academic freedom. So, Neca and Alison, please, I said that Paige and Catalina were the home team, but please consider our Human Rights Research and Education Center as your home. Whenever you need us, whenever you want to do something, please think of us. We are always at your disposal. Follow Women at the Center on social media. Follow, if possible, the Human Rights Research and Education Center in social media. And we have many more activities on academic freedom coming in the next few months. So thank you very much once again, Alison, Neca, muchas gracias, Catalina, and thank you very much, Paige. Thank you to Caroline Fauché for doing she's the master of puppets of our center. So thank you very much for everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.